welcome back to Creative Endeavoring. Over the last few episodes, I gave you a lot of information. So, before I give you another 20 minutes of information to process, I actually wanted to pull back for a moment and have a conversation with you about why I chose to start here. This is a podcast about creative endeavoring and how creativity is an energetic process. So far, we talked about your brain, the default mode network, autopilot, and perception. And now we are about to go several episodes deeper into the nervous system, which is your creative instrument. I am not a neuroscientist and I never want to position myself as one. I am someone who has spent years studying these mechanisms because originally I needed to understand them for myself. I needed to understand me. There was a good portion of my life where I was living in what I now understand as chronic stress and almost constant survival mode. I was constantly operating from that fight or flight, hyper alert place because of past trauma I had and health issues and, just like life circumstances. But my relationship with health and spirituality actually started way before I knew what the default mode network was. I had a rare type of cancer when I was 18, and going through something like that so young fundamentally changes the way that you think about your body and life in general, mortality, everything. I had to have emergency surgery, and while I was in the hospital recovering, I had an NDE, which is a near death experience. And at the time, I didn't even know what an NDE was. It was just an experience I had that I never really questioned, especially because there were so many synchronicities that surrounded it that it made it difficult for me to believe that it wasn't real. I had already gone into surgery knowing that my chances weren't great, but I was fortunate that the surgery was successful. It was my recovery that was difficult. I had this fever that kept rising, and I was in a really negative mental space of just, self loathing, like, why me, God? And so then this one night I had the NDE and I was given a choice. I could stay or I could go. And I remember in that moment realizing that everybody around me had already done everything that they could. My doctor had fought to save my life. My parents, my family, and friends were all praying for me, in desperation. And now it was my turn. I had to choose. And I won't go into full detail today about everything that was said or presented to me during the NDE. But after I chose to stay, I was told that I would need to experience and understand a lot of different perspectives in this life, and that by shifting my mental state, my body would follow. And so I did. And literally that next morning, my fever was completely gone. And what was supposed to be a 6 month recovery period was literally like 2, 3 weeks. And at that age, I didn't have the language for what I experienced or, for consciousness or like all the things that I've been sharing. But I walked away from that experience with a very different relationship to life and spirituality and choice and what we might be beyond this physical body. And I think that's really where the two parts of me started developing at the same time. There was the part of me that was deeply spiritual and intuitive. And then there was the part of me that needed to understand how things worked. And I didn't only want to believe something, I wanted to understand it. And years later, those two paths, I guess, started meeting because while spiritually, I was asking questions about consciousness and purpose and creation and what it means to be here. I was also living in a body that had learned to survive. And this shows up differently for everyone. But for me, it was hypervigilance and control like behaviors, OCD like behaviors and perfectionism. I would manage everything on my own. I was over functioning and being somewhat of an avoidant. I felt overwhelmed just thinking about the future. I had major brain fog and was emotionally disconnected. And when I wasn't overworking, I was passively consuming. Wine was my vice. I people pleased and suppressed my feelings and opinions. I was extremely hyper attuned to other people's moods and feelings. And when I started working with my mentor, Ankara, I remember the first couple sessions of breath work were really difficult for me because I didn't realize how often I would hold my breath. My breathing was shallow. I was just bracing myself, legit in constant fight or flight mode. And honestly, the list goes on. These were patterns that formed when I was a child and progressively changed or got worse as I got older. My autopilot was locked in. And honestly, I might have been perceived by some people as positive or optimistic, but internally I was pretty fearful. I could literally solve a problem that hadn't even happened yet. The way I spoke to myself wasn't nice. I was in relationships for way too long, just riding the merry-go-round until basically I was kicked off. There wasn't enough love or respect for myself for a long time. And at that time, I didn't understand that these responses had become deeply learned patterns. It was just how I operated. And in a lot of ways, it served me. It made me resilient and resourceful and really good at figuring things out. But it was also very exhausting because when your system is constantly preparing for what might happen next, it's very difficult to actually be where you are, to be present, or even to see a different future when so much of your energy is just focused on the past or on what's not working. So, of course, life circumstances eventually forced me to do the inner work and to be honest with myself. We all reach a breaking point or a threshold in our lives, and I had a lot of questions. Was I living authentically? Why can I consciously know that I'm okay and still feel like something's wrong? Like my baseline was just pure anxiety. Like, why can I tell myself one thing and have my body respond to something completely different? Or why do certain patterns keep repeating themselves, even if I understand them intellectually? Was I healthy mentally and physically? I mean, I was doing all the right things. I was responsible and independent, I was functional, but I wasn't happy or fulfilled. The mental fatigue that I experienced was real. And so all those questions just, of course, sent me down a rabbit hole. And I started studying the subconscious, the brain, neuroplasticity, the default mode network, prediction, perception, the nervous system, identity, beliefs, nutrition. And eventually, I started seeing how these mechanisms weren't separate from the spiritual and creative work that I had already been doing. I don't personally experience spirituality and the body as, competing conversations. For me, understanding more about my biology didn't make my spiritual experiences less meaningful. It gave me another language through which I could understand myself. And the more I understood for myself, the more I started applying it to my own life, and then to my work, and then with my clients. And eventually, these ideas started becoming part of what is now the Lux Movement's restoration method. So, when I share neuroscience or psychology on this podcast, I'm not sharing it from the position of a neuroscientist. I'm sharing what I've learned through years of studying these mechanisms, applying them into my own life, and using that understanding to develop the framework that I teach today. We all experience different patterns and behaviors. We all have our own unique lens and perception of life, our own baseline. And as I continue to dive deeper into the different layers of perception, your nervous system, and identity, I encourage you to remain curious. Okay, go research it, read the studies, listen to people who have dedicated their entire careers to these individual fields. I want you to understand yourself because that's how I got here. I wanted to understand myself. And eventually, I realized that if I was going to consciously create my life, I needed to understand the instrument that I was creating through. And the reason I chose to start underneath the techniques instead of jumping straight into manifestation or visualization or creative routines, which are all tools and practices I believe in, is because I didn't want to give you another technique without helping you understand the system that is actually using the technique. Because you can read all the books and listen to all the podcasts. You can make that vision board and affirm all day long, right? And meditate. But when life is happening, like the mortgage or rent is due, your account is negative, or you don't know where the money's coming from, right? The economy is shit. Business might not be doing what it's supposed to do, or someone rejects you. Something you were counting on just falls apart. Or everything could be okay, but you just have this underlying baseline of anxiety. There is no amount of namaste that is going to help you because your body is responding to what it believes is happening right now, right? We talked about this. Your survival pathways activate. Your mind starts to problem solve, and positive thinking and all these tools are essential. But I'm more interested in teaching you how to understand what's happening when you become anxious or fearful or disconnected, how to recognize the pattern, work with the body, and return to yourself, to regulate yourself, and eventually how to consciously decide what gets to lead. Because without having this understanding, you can't lead your nervous system, right? Your nervous system is leading you. Because if your nervous system is participating in what you notice, what you avoid or approach, how you respond to uncertainty, and what feels possible to you, then it's already participating in your creative process, whether you're consciously working with it or not. And that's why it's your creative instrument. Because creativity, at least the way that I define it, is much bigger than making something like music or art, right? Or even building a business or content creating. Those are expressions of creativity. Because remember, you're creating all the time through the decisions you make, the opportunities that you notice or don't notice, the things that you pursue or avoid, all the relationships that you build, the way you respond to uncertainty, the possibilities you allow yourself to entertain, and ultimately the direction of your life. Your inner state trains your perception, decisions, and nervous system, and that changes your life trajectory. So, before we talk about consciously creating, I want you to understand the instrument you're creating through your perception, your nervous system, identity, emotions, your expectations and imagination, your body, all of it. You are the creative instrument. And if you don't understand your instrument, it's very difficult to intentionally play it, right? So, if you've been following this series from the beginning, we now understand that our default patterns influence what we predict and perceive, that what we predict and perceive influences how we respond, and that the perceiver gives us the ability to see the pattern while it's happening. So, over the next few episodes, we are going to explore so many different layers of the nervous system and identity and bring awareness to the many patterns that may be influencing your life, for better or worse. We've spent these first episodes learning how to see the instrument, and now we are going to learn how to work with it. As always, take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, and I'll see you at the next episode.